is it garbage? Is this something that can't actually be repurposed or recaptured in a way that isn't just going to be slowly degrading over time and end up where it goes anyways? Or is there a way to actually understand the systems that can be put in place to capture that value?
Hello, hello. Welcome to the Good Garbage Podcast. My name is Ved Krishna. My primary reason for existence has been to find ways to leave our wonderful planet cleaner. We will be speaking with material innovators, creators, and propagators to learn from them how we can build for scale and towards a regenerative future. Their stories will help us answer the big question, what is good garbage?
John Fels's charm is disarming. He's the kind of person you want to hang out with. So it's understandable why people like Leonardo DiCaprio and Ashton Kutcher hang out with him. This quintessential surfing dude has gone from making surfboards to all sorts of protective packaging, primarily using chitin from the wasted shrimp shells. His company, Cruisefoam, has been recognized as one of the best innovations by Time magazine in 2023, apart from various other accolades. This is a delightful conversation with a lot of banter and exploration. Hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Hello, hello. I'm so happy today to have John Fels, the CEO and co-founder of Cruisefoam, to be with me. John, just reading about you has made me so excited about this interview, and I know that we have so many things in common. So thank you so much for joining.
No, I'm excited. I'm excited. It's going to be a fun chat.
Super. So of course, I want to chat at growing up because I saw that you've been a surfer guy, and I'm sure there are influences that got you into doing what you do today. So love to hear that journey.
Yeah, it's been an interesting one for sure. I mean, when we look at the origin stories of Cruisefoam, if you will, I'm born and raised in California, but I think the real inflection point happened when I went to college. And I went down to college at UC Santa Barbara, and I did my my bachelor in chemical engineering. And it's a funny story arc because I went in thinking I'd be a petroleum engineer. And, you don't ever know what you're really going to do when you get into college, which is fair. I kind of use that as my defense. But it is something I think about sometimes, and it makes me smile and makes me smirk because you learn and you expose yourself to things that I think really direct where you find importance in life. And for me, when I went through college, there were some pretty significant changes in my life, mainly through my family, and it kind of redefined a lot of what was important. And well, when you're in Santa Barbara and you got the ocean as your backyard, there's pretty much one thing you go do, and you just go dive in the ocean. And I just started surfing like twice a day. Became this medium of connection that I think really just helped me through that period, but also gave me clarity of where I wanted to go. And it was not being a petroleum engineer. And so very quickly coming out of college, I graduated in '08, which I'm sure a number of your listeners will understand the period of graduating and trying to come out in one of the worst periods, I would say, ever, at least in the recent generation, to find a job was monumentally difficult. And it was, again, strange because I kept hearing these birds, oh, there's so many jobs over in Texas, go be a petroleum engineer. I'm just like, I can't. There was this, it's hard to describe, but I'm so glad I stuck to my guns. I found a job in Santa Barbara, being an environmental engineer. It was a great job, but I look back and I'm like, good, how did I do that for 6 years? And thank God I found an amazing woman. She told me to get back to school. I went up to get my materials engineering degree at University of Washington, and that's what changed my life. There's no kidding it. Like, the area there is absolutely beautiful. The nature, the connection, just the vibrancy of what you experience in the Pacific Northwest is, even coming from California, I would say it's very hard to compare that aura that you get from the greenery up there. The green is just different. It's so strange to say that, but it's just different. And meeting Marco, I went through the materials program. He's a big surfer, even bigger than I am, but we really had this connection more, I would say, on the core around the ocean. And at the time when I met him, it was interesting because he wasn't taking any new students and nobody knew why. And it was because he was planning to come down to Santa Cruz. And I think he only took me because I was coming straight from Santa Barbara. And I make the joke that he could probably like taste the salt like coming off of me from surfing, where we were kind of joking. There's very much surf in the Pacific Northwest. And so we kind of made this connection, I think, that was more fundamental than academics. And we really kind of resonated, with each other. And he was working with some really special materials, chitin being one of them, this, the second most abundant biopolymer. And a lot of it's just thrown into waste. It's just lost. And it's crazy when you start looking at these numbers around other materials and just other resources that are just not being captured, and the values not being put to use in a way that makes any sense. And we kind of thought at the time he was doing a lot of bioplastics, crazy army stuff, like never going to see the light of day. But we really had this light bulb moment. I remember we were joking around in his lab, and we were like, why not try to make a surfboard? We kind of ride around on this material essentially, or this product. I hate to say it, it's kind of trash. It's going to end up as trash. It's going to be around on this planet for essentially forever. And we are using it to connect to a medium that we love, but it's also a strange representation of what's destroying it. And I think for us, that was kind of that moment where this became something more than just, hey, let's go make surfboards. And we kind of, came down to Santa Cruz, tried to do surfboards for a bit, for sure. That was an interesting period. I learned a lot during that period. And it was again, one of these huge growth moments for me personally, because I had a kid during that period. I'm trying to start a company. You're getting paid by the school. Let me tell you, you ain't getting paid well. We don't have to go into details, but usually you're not.
I can imagine.
I literally, for the first 2 years, delivered pizzas at night to just have enough money, honestly, to survive.
That's amazing.
And I look back again, it's like the people around you that drive, and that's where I quickly learned there's no way I'm going to be able to do this on my own. And I also realized that if I'm going to do this, it's going to have to be on something that's really, again, meaningful. I draw similarities back into college, where I'm like, okay, yeah, surfboards are fun, but it's like, what am I really trying to do here? What is really the impact that I want to have? And I think through that process of extreme challenge and adversity and having just an amazing support, we saw, if we're going to do this, we have to tackle one of the biggest problems, and it's not surfboards. I mean, like I said, it's a great representation, but surfboards ain't the problem. It's the single-use materials, and it can be packaging is obviously the obvious one, but there's so many single-use materials that I would say even go beyond packaging. When we look at them, why are we making these things in the way that we do, and why are we not understanding, I think, the circularity behind what we can achieve if we really put the resources and the stakeholders together in a way that's going to be meaningful. And so that's when we kind of shifted, I think, about a year and a half in 2018, and just kind of hit the ground running. And it's been a ton of work. And I think what we really wanted to make sure we did at the time when we realized this transition, we started looking at materials and kind of packaging, and especially biomaterials. A lot were making incredible materials, mushrooms and all these things. And I think one of the biggest pitfalls we saw was the scalability. And it was weird because we kept the mantra that we had for surfboards. We're like, if we're going to make surfboards, you have to make it the exact same way or damn close to how they make surfboards now. And obviously we kind of got close, but then we realized this isn't the issue. And then we took that to packaging. We're like, if we're going to make foam at scale, how do they make that now? And how do we make sure if our material is going to actually get to where we need it to go, it needs to fit into these systems? The idea of breaking down something and having to rebuild it up that's been built for the last 100 years, and you just have these entrenched players, we'll call them, it's not going to happen. And that's where I think sticking to that and really having that focus from the onset has put us in a position now that's extremely unique in how we're able to engage with this entire ecosystem around packaging. So it's a fun period, and it's been challenging, but I think we're at this inflection point of really seeing this kick into high gear, which is, I'm ready for it.
Super, super. And thank you so much for that kind of great introduction. And it sets us up for numerous questions that kept popping in my mind as you were kind of speaking. So starting with you inferred a little bit about big life changes at the time when you went to Santa Barbara, and you talked about family. Can I dig in a little more? Because of course, like I'm not a surfer.
I've tried. I can't balance to kind of save my life, so I probably need to practice more. But I am a diver, so you see things floating, and I see things under, and I'm sure you may have dived as well. But and then those were impacts that I had in my life. So were there particular kind of incidences that actually really impacted you in terms of materials and especially in terms of packaging? Did you see something that was it really hit home that this is something you had to do?
It's interesting because it's a corollary to packaging. And when I spent my time at Santa Barbara and spending so much time in the ocean specifically, there are, if anybody knows the area, there's Channel Islands that are off the coast there. And, I'm not going to go off and name them all, but there's like 5 or 6 or so Channel Islands. And there's always been this controversy that there's these giant oil rigs out there drilling the oil that's very abundant off of the Santa Barbara County coast. And, you know, that's fine. It's great, whatever. But I think when you look at how it's implemented and the impact it's having, it just becomes so apparently clear this could be done so much better in areas that aren't going to have the impact they're going to have. And why are we looking at making these materials at such an abundant rate that we're having to go into these ecosystems that's absolutely destroying? Because this thing that I used to remember so palatably and so clearly is I'd surf, and every single time, maybe not every single time, 90% of the times I go out and surf, I'd have to come back to my house, which I lived in a house with an incredible amount of people. It was absolutely ridiculous, but it was right on the beach side. And I would go up there and I would walk out to the balcony that we had, and I would sit down and I'd take a butter knife, and I would take a butter knife and I'd put my feet up on my knee, and I would have to scrape tar off of my foot
Wow,
every
that's crazy.
single time I went out to surf. And like, I'm not going to pretend to be an exact expert in oil drilling off the coast. I'm sure there's this idea of natural seepage, or that's what's been said. But the amount of times that I had to do this, and then also when I'd be out there surfing and you just see these, I would call them plumes almost to a degree, floating on the top of the water right there on the coast where you're like right in the break, and you'd literally like, you couldn't touch them because they literally just stick to you and cake to you. You couldn't get it off. Like I'm saying, I have to use a knife to literally put it off of my skin, or to destroy your board, or all these things. And it was just, it was almost every time I'd go out there, I'd experience that. And that was extremely impactful when I just looked at how we're trying to source materials and the way in which we're just totally disregarding the impact that it's having in the natural world. And I think it was heartbreaking. And that combined with just, that moment of my life, it was like, okay, this is something I need to be more connected to. And it took me a while to get there. I'm not going to lie, but I don't want to say I have excuses, but it was definitely not something that had a direct path coming out of college. But when I met Marco, and the other thing that's really interesting, and I met him at University of Washington, but we came down to UC Santa Cruz to kind of like do the initial research on this. And this other very palpable kind of anecdotal story was the lab I worked in was this basement windowless lab. So it was pretty depressing when I look back on it, and I'd go deliver pizzas. So it was like, okay, what am I doing? But what's interesting is the literal hallway that I would walk into it was directly outside the door of my lab was the collection point of all styrofoam for the entire campus. And so it was this
Wow.
50-yard hallway with Gaylord boxes just filled with tiny coolers that someone probably got, like, some chemical delivered from Sigma or whoever, and it's just, what's that ever going to be used for again? No, there's no recovery for that. And it just, daily I'd go in and you just see it overflowing. I'd have to pick pieces up and throw it back in there. And you're just kind of sitting there thinking, good Lord, I guess this is why I'm doing this. And it was just a huge motivator seeing that every day. So those kind of two big moments are two huge ones that stand out in my mind when I look back.
That's amazing.
And to think of, you could have been a petroleum engineer.
I know I
Think
could
of
have been. It's so interesting because like
you could have been making that foam, John,
it's
from
crazy.
styrene.
It really is insane when you think about it, and just how much I've learned about something that I did not realize at the time, where it was going to go. It's been absolutely mind boggling. The size, the
Yeah.
sprawling nature of what packaging is. It's incredible. It's absolutely incredible. So it's been.
And it's just in the last 70 years.
I
Think
know,
about that.
I know, I
It's
know.
not that old.
It's really not, and it's accelerating. That's what's because people ask me, oh, how has it been starting, trying to do the startup? You have so many things, COVID, all these things. And I mean, by no means was COVID not absolutely horrific, but you'd start one benefit I think that came out of it is people got so exposed to supply chain in a way that they had never seen before. And it has just, I think, really put a spotlight on not only the fragility, but the impact it's having. And because once it's on your doorstep, it's weird how a motivator that can be, composed to, seeing it on the news, tens of thousands of miles away. It's strange how that can take people into gear. But I'm so happy it happened when you look back because it's happening in real time right now.
I'm glad they put all that styrofoam on your way, as you were walking through that corridor. Look what you did, thanks to that. But I'm also surprised at how little affects people. I still see people buy so much of packaged water, and
I
these are
know.
simple things. Come on, you don't need it, and the amount of foam as well. Um, you know, my wife is a West Virginian girl, and they have no clue
Oh
in
my
West Virginia that
goodness.
this matters. And I go there, and my heart is coming out of my mouth because it's literally like every time you go to the park, it's just piles of foam, and I'm
It's
like, we are
bad.
eating out of this. It is
They like the
crazy.
cups. When you see the cups, I'm just like, how? How?
The red solo cups. Oh my gosh, that's really amazing. But I want to go a little deeper on the shift from a petroleum engineer to a chemical engineer to a material scientist.
Yep.
So talk to me a little more about, I guess by the time you chose material science, something was already kind of shifting. And when you chose material science, was there a particular kind of direction that you wanted to take? Because material science itself can be very, very
Oh, it could be
wide.
anything. You can
And
do
and
anything.
yeah, it could be anything, exactly. So
Anything.
what was that? What was the calling?
That's a very interesting question. Like I said, I think it's a culmination. The seed was UC Santa Barbara. I think what gave me direction, at least in a way that I saw what didn't work, or I saw where I didn't want to go. And I don't mean this in any bad way. I love the company. When I looked there for 6 years, it's a company called Tetra Tech, and they do amazing work, but a lot of it's environmental consulting and engineering. And it was a lot of cleaning up, groundwater, soil remediation, habitat restoration, a lot on army bases, working on Cape Canaveral, Vandenberg Air Force Base, Edwards Air Force Base. I mean, all these different things and huge projects, huge projects. But then I'm like, okay, this is like in the middle of the desert. Like this should be cleaned up, but like, is this where we need to be focusing right now? And I just felt like there's so much that I learned down that period of how kind of government, regulatory bodies, technology, and legislation kind of all merge to make things happen. Maybe I think they could have been a little bit more impactful or effective, but it was kind of gave me this framework of understanding, okay, the environmental side is one thing and the sustainability side is one thing, but there are so many components that need to come together to make things actually move forward with, real purpose. And I think when I went to go get my master's, I knew I wanted to do something not in chemical engineering. I actually remember sitting down and thinking, okay, I'm not going to go get a chemical engineering master's or PhD. I don't want to say I hate it, but like the where that industry takes you is pretty specific. You're going to be a process engineer. You're going to go work in a lab. You're usually not going to do most times, industry type of innovation and work. And I really wanted to be in industry. And so when I thought about it, I'm like, mechanicals, again, kind of a catch-all. And this idea of materials really went back to this idea of, I think, seeing all of these, I would say, waste materials floating around in the ocean and thinking, why can't these things be made better? And then kind of connecting these dots around my experiences during environmental consulting. And when I came out of my master's, it was kind of a depressing period. I'm going to be completely honest. I came out and I looked around, and the only thing that was in the industry was, and this is a weird name to say right now, just given everything that's happening, is Boeing. It's Boeing industry. It's literally, I mean, you come out of the University of Washington and
Yep, lots of materials.
90% of the materials engineer at University of Washington go and work for Boeing. And I don't want to say blessing in disguise and go down that path now, but I mean, the bottom line is like, I had no real interest in aviation. It wasn't like I didn't see where that was going to lead me to something that, gave me purpose and that I cared about. And I think that's where I had this moment where, I met Marco. I did the master's program with him. We had really this palpable connection. He basically said, there's one reason I wasn't taking any other students is because I knew I was coming down to UC Santa Cruz, so I couldn't take new students. And he's basically said, I think we can do something really special with this material. And, what I've seen with it. And, I was naive enough, I guess, as I would say, to jump off that cliff, because I've always had an ethos, I guess you might call it, that everybody, or most people, if you're lucky, get 1, 2, maybe 3, but probably 2 really significant opportunities that come across in your life to not just do something special, but do something that can have incredible reward for you personally, and, ideally makes your life better and everybody around you better. But the idea is that it typically comes with such an incredible amount of risk. And most people, you're maybe not in that position because you don't have, the timing's not right for whatever reason. And again, the people I had around me, my wife and the support, I was like, let's go down to Santa Cruz and try to make surfboards out of this material. My wife's like, what are you talking about? And thank God I made that decision. And I think I was just so lucky to recognize that moment for what it was and act on it. And I think those sequenced events, nothing happens in an instant. And for me, reading those breadcrumbs, it's really interesting to see how that all unfolded and has led me to where I am now.
Yeah, superb. And I want to carry on that discussion on the evolution from surfboards to what cruise foam became, and it's a good kind of transition or movement towards that. And it reminded me of a story which is kind of similar and kind of not. But I ended up with this. There was this very interesting Australian company called Zeoform. And interestingly, we are in the domain more with the celluloses and the
Yep.
fibers. And I loved exploring people who were doing interesting things. So I got to know of this, and I go off to Australia just to see them. Interestingly, they like you were making very, very interesting hardened materials. They were actually making digiderus from fiber.
Wow.
They were just kind of compressing, like really refining it at a high consistency and then shaping it, and really solid stuff. I still have some of their materials.
That's
And I was
amazing.
amazed. But interestingly, they also wanted to make other stuff which was more kind of elemental to impact. So they said, yeah, we can make a lot of sturdy, solid stuff like surfboards,
Yep.
but we want to make more impact, and they moved into other things afterwards. So,
That's
but it was
amazing.
interesting that you were mentioning that from a different angle. So I would love to hear the story of Marco and you moving
Oh
to
my goodness.
getting to make softboards and then
Oh my goodness.
transitioning to what you do now. That'll be beautiful. Go ahead.
Yes, this is beautiful. It's absolutely outrageous. Yeah, so 2017 is kind of the marker we came out of the school and we moved into this closet, I would call it. It was called Startup Sandbox, and it was about the size of a sandbox. Oh my goodness. We were trying to basically, like I said, stick to our guns and find ways to develop this in a way that it would be manufacturable at scale. Because we kind of knew we could make the material, at least very early versions of it. And we're like, okay, how do we do surfboards? And really the only way to do surfboards is with a closed mold. You can extrude it, which is ironic because that's how we make our foam now. And there may be ways we could make surfboards now, but that's another discussion. When we started, the only real daylight we had was these closed molds. And I remember we had this absolute maniac of a technician and prototype guy who, again, he worked for us. He left for 4 years, and now he's our full-time prototype lead, which is, again, amazing circularity and just, I love it. But he came in, we could pay him absolutely nothing. And he developed this process of taking our early lab scale tech and trying to build an automation of making basically the slurry, let's call it, or the base material of the foam, and then pouring it into a mold and heating it to try to have it blow out into, similar to a surfboard. And we have these pictures of us literally having no idea how to heat this thing. We didn't have any heat bands. We had no way to do this properly whatsoever. It was absolutely ridiculous that we even tried, but you start somewhere. And these pictures we have, I want to frame them at some point because it's literally us in the backyard parking lot of this like sort of facility, if you can call it that. And our steel molds are sitting over charcoal fire that we have like 5-gallon drums that we're like hand mixing to try to pour in and then heat and blow. And it's like this
Following all the safety
all the
practices,
safety. Of course, OSHA, if you're listening, is 100% safe. We followed all of the protocols. There's definitely nothing wrong here. And it was absolutely ridiculous. I mean, there's no other way to, it was absolutely ridiculous. And what was so funny is like, okay, this is just not going to happen. That's pretty clear. And there was this breakthrough moment where Marco took our foam home, or formulation home, if you will, and he essentially threw it in the oven in a cupcake tin. And what happened was there was this concentration of heat and basically pressure that he was able to get. And it was not quite expansion like you would imagine it, but it allowed us to get a very low density in a very nice, resilient foam. And we're like, okay, where do we take this? And we kind of started playing around with still looking at surfboards. But what we realized is, again, there's kind of two ways that you make surfboards or make packaging. One is kind of similar to surfboards. You have a closed mold, you pour beads in there. I mean, it's a liquid for surfboards, but it's kind of the same idea. It expands, you'd expanded polystyrene beads and you get your known styrofoam packaging that everybody knows. And the other one is extrusion. And so we kind of had this idea of like, okay, we can keep going down this path of doing it for surfboards in a closed mold. It's not going to work. And it was a very analogous time for us when we also were going through this program called the National Science Foundation. It has what's called the I-Core. And what is absolutely hilarious about you just mentioning Australia is part of this program is it's a 7-week intense program that they require you to do over 100 in-customer discovery interviews in 7 weeks in your specific industry. And I will tell you, that sounds easier than it is. It is outrageously difficult. And the only way to do it and actually make it happen is you have to find conferences. And so at the time, we're like, okay, if we're going to actually explore packaging, seeing the kind of limitations around surf, where would we want to go and how would we make this happen to kind of just learn more about this industry? Let's use this NSF grant to kind of see where this might be more fruitful and add more value, the value proposition, obviously. And the first place I went was Australia. I went to the Gold Coast. There was this
Oh, that's exactly where I was.
It's
amazing. Did you end up going to a little town called Mullumbimby?
No, I wish I did.
Oh
I wish I did.
It is a unique town. I almost convinced my wife to shift there. And she went there and she said, too hippie for me. So it didn't work out, but it was so close.
It's beautiful and the surf's amazing around there. I mean, it was like kind of eye-opening. It was hilarious. I mean, it was like one of those, it was almost surreal because I'm like, okay, this is the first time I've been to Australia for sure. I flew in almost on like a red eye. I was like in the middle of the night. I got to my hotel. It's obviously pitch black. I have no idea where I am. And then when the sun rises, and I'm like, holy crap. Like it's totally different once you can see the ocean and everything. And when you're there and then I'm going to this Australian Institute packaging conference. And it's the first time I've ever been to a packaging conference in Australia. And it was just culture shock to the max where you're just, where am I? What is going on? And I remember, and I still actually talked to some of the people that I met there. One was a company that was making or turning sheep wool into a insulation insert, replacement for cold chain. And it's weird to see where we are now doing cold chain products, but at the time I had no idea that's where we'd end up. So I just went there trying to learn as much as I could. And we obviously kind of knew we were going to fit into styrofoam or EPS, kind of replacements. But again, in packaging, that could be literally anything. Styrofoam is used in an incredible amount of things I'd never even realized until I got into this. And so we got into this industry and started really exploring, and all of a sudden we realized, oh crap, we made a material without even realizing it in surfboards. When you look at what surfboards is, it's like one of the most high performing, demanding materials when you look at foams. People are riding 100-foot waves on these things. We're trying to match that properties. And all of a sudden we step over and we're like, we kind of have a material that I don't want to say is better, but it's like basically hitting all the marks that we would need for an EPS without even realizing that was a target we were trying to hit. And all of a sudden we just had this market fit, both in what we could do performance wise and the value prop that the customer was looking for. And I think what really made us click on in a way that helped us understand the value we can bring even greater was that mantra of, if we can do this in the same way that's done, already looking at extrusion and already exploring avenues of extrusion, this is going to be game changing. And I think that's where we saw the real opportunity, not just clearly from the business side, but how that, like we talked about, where was that real impact? We could actually do something in packaging that at the time, and I would say even arguably now, really isn't being done when you look at real structural impact or protective packaging and foam. So,
and that is really interesting. I love the idea that we can make stronger, tougher stuff. So this is kind of
it just worked. It's weird how it lines up.
The Good Garbage podcast has been brought to you by Packa. Packa has been creating solutions in the food packaging, carry, and service space. Packa utilizes sugarcane residue and upcycles it into amazing products. Their latest offering is a compostable, flexible packaging solution for the chocolate and confectionery industry. The products are available in the Indian subcontinent and in North America now. Packa is also building an end-to-end solutions for customers in the food service and delivery space. For any query, do email at connect@packa.com, and Packa is Pakka. Now, back to the show. I, of course, see that you're looking at chitins as your base. When did that become clear that we want to do something with this material? Because and how did that become clear? Because it seems like you've kind of stuck to that base material.
To a degree, I mean, we definitely see ourselves exploring all waste. We want to find everywhere we can utilize industrial waste. So chitin is by no means the only material that we utilize in our processes, but I would say without a doubt, it is the inspiration. It is what has led us down this path of understanding where we can capture and really look towards nature in ways that is completely ignored. And I think chitin is such an incredible, material when you look at it and how it exhibits its kind of, strength in nature, how it polymerizes, how it, really creates composites with other materials like minerals and, obviously proteins, and does it in a way that just has incredible properties. And we're like, well, if we look at this and we look at what this material is doing and it's a waste, what's going on? Where has this not been focused and understood the value of how this can be captured in a way that can really be scaled and impactful, but not just in the environmental way. When you look at the like I said, the economical benefit of certain things. And it's interesting because there's always has to be timing. Innovation always requires timing. And I think what's really critical is we're in that nexus point. I think, we talked about COVID a little bit. I think there's a lot of other tailwinds behind it, but the headwinds are quickly disappearing when you look at consumer education and all these things. And for us, what we want to be able to do is always look ahead as much as we can within reason, identifying, where there's so much ag waste. There is so much agricultural just byproduct that just is completely disregarded. And when you look at, I think, other biomaterials, a lot of them have their benefits, some have their downside, but there should be no reason to go look at ways in which we have to like grow new materials to make our packaging. There is so much out there when we look at what's available. How do we tap into these gigantic supply chains? And it's beautiful because if it's done right, and if you can keep a pretty good cost structure, everybody's going to get more value. I mean, I always talk about the shrimp. I mean, shrimp shells are like 20% weight of some of the shrimp. And like, you're losing all of that. All of that. It's just out the door. And you have minerals in there. You have, like I said, all these proteins. You have clearly chitin. Like one of the most interesting companies that I love in this space is called Tidal Vision. They're up in the Pacific Northwest, ironically enough. And, they're clearly taking the shell waste, but they have such an incredible circular model of not just taking that, but using it for the minerals and the phosphates and all these things as soil amendments and going back into the ag and creating regenerative soil. And it's like, how is this not the standard? And I think it's quickly becoming clear that if this is done at scale with the right partners and the right stakeholders, it's going to be really fun. And so we just want to play a part when we look at our material base. How do we just stay at the tip of the spear? Working with chitin, working with ag waste, there's so many things out there right now. Like I said, the mushrooms, I think, is an incredible platform, maybe not for packaging directly, but I think you look at those types of things, it's very interesting where it can go. And one of the fun ones that I like too is insects. If you look at chitin sources, insects is an interesting one, especially in Europe. That's what I'm saying. It's literally, there's so much growth around insect and horsefly farming for proteins for pharmaceuticals. And they probably just don't care. They're making so much money off the pharmaceuticals. But the point is like, how do we start identifying that as the standard? And I think that's where we want to make that very clear, that there's value on both ends, and not just about how do we clean up. If you do this right, there's value on actually what the suppliers can capture, what the producers can capture. We can greenify manufacturing. And that's for us where this value stack becomes so important, because in the past, when you look at other biomaterials trying to break in, that chain breaks at some point where somebody has to give up something too big, and it's not going to happen. And I think it's understanding that connectivity of that ecosystem is critical to bringing innovative materials to the market. So,
yeah, till you don't go to Southeast Asia and they just fry. And
well, that's true.
And then all the chitin is inside. And
that's true. Well, we may have to find a different source supply once we go to Asia, but I think
get the shrimp.
And that's what's really. I mean, I think that's the other critical component that you kind of touch on a little bit is when we look at biomaterials, when we look at packaging, what's really been a necessity, especially when we talk to certain brands that we talk to, Fortune 100 companies, they have global presence. They need a supply chain that they can source from and produce globally. There has to be a way in which you can take packaging, especially foam out of all packaging, and produce it regionally, produce it locally, produce it on a way that can scale efficiently and not require an enormous amount of capex. And that goes also to the supply. You can't require a supply to come from a singular geographical location and expect that to impact a global supply chain. And I think that reality and that mentality for us has been another core principle of how we want to make sure we're always looking ahead to other waste sources, because chitin itself you can get from 6 different waste sources at scale, assuming you can capture it. And then obviously ag waste is absolutely outrageous how much of that is out there. So
yep.
Yeah, so I think that's what's really critical too, is understanding those chains and that fence as well.
So, but staying with that question, what was the aha moment where you said, we're going to work with chitin? There has to be some point at which you say that, I'm going to work with chitin. And then linking to that, how did chitin is ultimately it's shells, and then you have to do something with it. So how did that technology start to evolve from there?
Yes, 100%. When honestly, the light bulb moment, I think, is when I was at University of Washington and I met Marco, and I started getting exploring kind of material. And, Marco's the material genius by all intents and purposes. And when we started really sitting down, like I said, there was a moment where it was really looking at that strength to weight ratio. When you really kind of looked at the technical aspects of what chitin is able to do, and then understanding how that can be clearly paired with other materials effectively, it really kind of gave us this instance of, okay, if we can use this material effectively how it's done in nature, or at least try to mimic that as much as we possibly can, we're going to get a material that has incredible strength and low weight. And that's always been the challenge for foam specifically. And so when we kind of looked at, honestly, just shooting the shit, if you will, in his office and talking about surfing and how it's made of these terrible materials, that's when we said, well, that was the moment. We're like, you need it to be strong, you need it to be lightweight. And we're like, well, we kind of know a material that fits that bill. Why don't we explore this a little bit? And, that's where I kind of had to take the leap of faith down to Santa Cruz and go try to make the first materials. And again, I won't go into the OSHA details, but it could have been a little bit better. The first ones I were making, ironically, were out of almost pure chitin. And it's ironic because it was too strong. I was essentially replicating it back into a shell, and I was turning it almost into a foam that I would say, just if you took a shell and somehow imagine it just foaming outwards and becoming a little bit bigger, it was just rock hard. And I was like, okay, well, this isn't really going to work. It's like, it's essentially a rock. And that's when we kind of had this idea of, okay, we're going to have to introduce other materials into this. If this just stands on its own, it's too hard. It's just not, it's a non-functional material for what we're looking for, especially at surfboards at the time, and definitely for protection. Nobody's packing their TVs with rocks. And so when we looked at it, we're like, how do we start understanding?
Won't be very protective for the
No,
TVs.
I don't think we'd survive very long in the TV or protective industry if that was the case. And so that's when we started looking at what are the thresholds that we need for different kind of applications. And it depends. We made some stuff that, has 50% plus. Again, there's problems with that to a degree. Sometimes it's too strong. Right now, economically, it's challenging. And that's where development of supply chains is so critical. But then when we started looking at when we made the transition from surfboards to packaging, we realized that it was more about matching that performance, and I would say a little bit less about that core material. Chitin is still clearly our special sauce, but it was more about how do we really balance this in a way that gets us the resilience, gets us the density, gets us the cost structure. And that's the most painful part. I hate to say it, but cost is so critical when you look at packaging. And, I think we're on a very, very clear path towards the manufacturing. Trust me, we had no idea how difficult that was going to be. Whew. But when we look at the supply side, that's something we always knew. And, chitin has so much promise behind it, and it's something we are continually exploring, especially when we look at higher end markets. When we look at things like construction, we look at foam for construction, we look at foam for automotive, we look for all these things. There may be a precedent to going up and making a 50% plus and super high margin, and there may be a better supply chitin. So that's like, for us, it was the inspiration, but we wanted to use it, and we have used it, in my opinion, as a launching pad to really identify how we can mimic these other waste streams and these other materials. And then it's honestly about blends. And I think that's what a lot of people don't realize, especially in foam world. And I would say a lot in plastic film world you might see coming out there is people are under this notion that these are all single materials, which is funny. Because I think that's what they're used to in a way. When you look at polystyrene, you look at polyethylene, you look at polypropylene, almost every company I know, and I'll tell you for us for sure, I would tell you there would be almost no way we could ever commercially bring to market, and I would say just surely on cost, a pure chitin foam. It would be absolutely impossible. And that's where we have to understand the stakeholder ecosystem. Where are these ways that we can tap in to understand all these components? Because if we just thought about making the most incredible material, which we have, but not also balancing that with cost and scale and basically market adoption, it becomes so complicated. And that's something I never realized when I started this initially with Marco. And the amount of learning that I've had over the last 4 or 5 years, I guess now it's 7 years, is tenfold what I ever got in school, tenfold what I ever got working for a more established company. And I think that's where I struggle with myself to suggest other people to go down this path. But it's something that, like, you look back and you're like, you have those inflection points, and you really look back with them with excitement of where it's taken you. And I think for us, chitin, the material, that launching pad it gave us, the brand it's given us, and what we've been able to do with it to this stage is just the beginning. I think we have so much potential. And like one thing I've said, we've injection molded our material. Like we've done some fun stuff. And so there's just that balance. And it's so interesting to see how challenging it can be when you look at the material space all the way to the manufacturing. And now it's just the end of life. I don't know if we want to get into that, but goodness gracious, the end of life is crazy trying to balance that. And that's one thing we're balancing here. Like I remember people asking us about chitin, and I mean, obviously we still use it and all these things. And so people are like, well, how is that going to, nobody knows what it is. And we're like, shit, you're right. Nobody has any idea what this material is. Like we've had to educate the entire industry around chitin in a lot of ways. And I think that's a blessing because now people are starting to understand these natural materials, these things that don't necessarily have to fit the mold that exists today. And to me, that's the biggest hurdle. That is by far the biggest hurdle, is that education piece around how we can, like I said, capture these, utilize, and really bring value to these lost materials in a way that's only going to be affected through collaboration. And we'll always push the boundaries. We'll always look for new and exciting materials. But chitin's been absolutely fantastic for us. And I think, like I said, it's the tip of the spear. It's going to be good.
Just taking a cue from your entrepreneurial journey, and of course you jumped right in. But if you draw a quadrant with knowledge on one side and skill on the other, if it's high knowledge, low skill, then it's going to be somebody like an expert, a consultant, that sort of thing. If it's high skill, low knowledge, then it is a good person, a person who works with their hands, a good
Yep.
carpenter, a good blacksmith. And then there is high skill and high knowledge, and that could be experts in the domain. And we as entrepreneurs start in the bottom left corner, low skill, low knowledge, and then you try and find the right people in every area and bring them
Oh
together
my
and
goodness.
create this soup, this alchemy that you guys have clearly created as well. And it also took me to another story. I of course I don't know that much about chitins myself, and I read from your side that it's more polysaccharides.
Yeah.
And I had always thought of them as proteins, amino acids. And you said that there's a mix of things in the shells. And I remember, and I'm sure you know of the study, Weiss Institute at Harvard did a lot of work with chitin. And I was in touch with them because I was looking at the films and they had really interesting
Yep.
structures.
Yep.
And again, totally chitin. But I had a few conversations with them, and exactly what you're saying. They said the challenge was to move from lab to pilot to commercial. The cost would just not work out.
Yeah.
So it's really great to hear that you guys. I see a lot of failures happen from pilot to scale.
Oh
It's not
yeah.
just lab to pilot. So it's interesting to see, and it's really interesting for me to hear that you guys were able to find the magic sauce, what the inputs are going to
Oh my
be and how
goodness.
do you blend, and would love to, as much as you can share, like how did you finally manage to say that, okay, this is, and it's counterintuitive. Like you were saying, you look at a shell, it's hard. And to say that, oh, I'm going to make a foam out of this. And of course, so that's not that simple. So how did that happen? And, of course, I don't want you to give the blend, but,
Yes.
how did the chemistry happen that, it's going to be a foam?
That's incredible. Yeah. When we looked at it initially, like I said, you kind of mentioned I saw it as films. I saw like these biomaterials as films initially, and like at the time, I'd never really been exposed to a biofoam, if you will. And when I took the leap, let's say with Marco, to come down to Santa Cruz and try to turn this, pure chitin, if you will, into a foam, was like, okay, how the heck am I going to do this? And it was kind of like, there's a lot of weird chemistry you can do with chitin, but essentially one of the biggest challenges is it doesn't want to dissolve very well. It doesn't want to break down into a liquid form very readily. You have to do kind of gnarly things to it to make it do that. And even then, it still doesn't really happen that well. And so there was kind of limitations when I looked at that. And so I started looking towards the industry of what was there at the time. And I think we talked about it, but one of the things I found was a cellulose foam. And I was starting to understand how they were making cellulosic foams. And a lot of what I found early on was they were basically taking cellulose nanofibers from trees and essentially hydrolyzing them in a way where they could activate them and then almost blend them, if you will, and cause the fibers to curl up into little balls that then would stack and they dry and you get a cellulose fiber. And at the time, that was kind of the launch pad. I was like, okay, because a lot of chitin, interestingly enough, comes in a fiber form. You can get it into powder, but sometimes it might just be a fiber. I mean, ironically, I can tell you stories where we used to try to source and get literally whole shrimp heads, and we'd be like, okay, guys, you gotta process this a little bit before we get it.
The whiskers, you can get the whiskers.
I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding. They literally, it was kind of gnarly. But anyways, the point is, like, at the early days, I was okay, working with different types of chitin, different formats, and I was like, if I can mimic this, and so without having to do too much gnarly dissolution or chemistry or anything like that. And again, you kind of get results and you see how it's working, but then you start hitting a wall where you're just understanding, okay, what's the real scalability behind this, even from lab to pilot? And that's where I kind of hit the initial wall. And I was like, okay, well, there's no way I can just do this with this blending and drying method and whatnot, especially if it's going to be, pure chitin, which I already knew economically had no viability. I mean, even at that stage, I could have told you that there's no way this would ever work unless I was literally selling it to NASA. It's just like, there's no way. And so coming out of the lab, we kind of took it to the next step, which I kind of explained. We kind of took it up to the next level. We started introducing other materials. The obvious one that everybody's very familiar with is starches. So we started kind of exploring different starches, but then we also look at different plant-based plasticizers, things like glycerol and these other materials. And so we started really wanting to understand this material set parameter range that we could work within, and where that would start leading us to kind of break that initial mold that I made in the lab, which was like a shell. It was like a rock hard shell. And it's like, hey, this is performance-wise not there, and cost-wise just impossible. And for us, it was coming out of that where we started to understand the blend aspect. But really, I think what was the breakthrough for us was about 2 years in, we realized we weren't going to be able to do it in a mold. Like I said, just biomaterials have water, doing that in a closed mold, evaporation and volatilization times. It's just the mechanics and the dynamics don't work. It's just the complex system we'd have to build with our MacGyver budget at the time was never gonna come together. And so we're like, okay, we're gonna have to get more creative. And that's when we started looking at extrusion. And we're like, okay, the other real platform behind doing this at scale is going to be extrusion. And ironically enough, that's kind of where, a lot of people do starch extrusion. You have peanuts and all these things. But what we really wanted to do was understand the platform that we could build around using chitin as that special sauce, and then really introduce material sets that allowed us to get a wide range of properties. And I think the hardest challenge for us, without a doubt, and I love this story, is we got to a point where we kind of like I said, doing MacGyver setups. We had like hoses together. We're like trying to mimic like quick reacting solution to like make like an extrusion sort of hose setup to like disperse foam and like have it quick set. It was absolute madness. And we're like, okay, we're reaching a plateau of where we have to take this kind of from lab to initial pilot. Like we have to make that jump right now. And the only way to do it was to get an extruder. I knew it. I was like, the only way we're going to do this is we have to be running on the machine that we expect to run on. We have to cross that gap at some point. And we were, I think at the time, lucky enough to get an NSF phase 1 grant and, our first like $1 million VC investment by absolute crazy people that I love. But the point is at the time I kind of was sitting there and I think it was 5 of us total. And it was by far probably the riskiest decision I ever made for the company. But I just sat down with my engineer, and his name is Matt. And I was like, you're going to go buy us an extruder. And he was like, okay, where? And I was like, go find out, basically. I was like, I don't think we can afford it. Yeah, I was like, I don't think we can afford. We can't afford one in Germany. I was like, I pretty much know. Like, well, I know Germany makes really nice extruders, but they're going to be like at least $1 million. We can't afford that. So I was like, get scrappy, find us something. And we knew we couldn't just go buy something completely without any sort of minimal development, good support, and whatever. And I don't know how he found it, but he found this company in Thailand that was actually a company that was Norwegian, and they were making extruders there. And this is the best part of the whole story is I sent him over there. I think it was January 2020. And I said, Matt, go get this extruder. And he's like, okay, I'm going to want like 2 months to run with them, take our material over there, make sure we can at least like put it through. It's not going to break their machine. because that's how they
I know
extrude.
where that. I know where this timeline is going. So
Yes,
just
and
keep going.
so
Go
yes, and
ahead.
so the extrusion, he's like, because we want to just like obviously that's what these companies do. They kind of help you trial to make sure you like their machine and they sell it to you. And so we got a good deal. But the company we found was in Thailand. I was like, it was like 200K. It was perfect. And so 2 months in, you're kind of getting results. He's kind of specced out the whole machine, and he's like, okay, I'm going to place an order and leave. And I was just like, it was like late February. I was like, Matt, I think you got to hurry the hell up and get out of there. And obviously, we know the pandemic was happening, and I remember he almost got trapped in Hong Kong. It was crazy getting him out of there. And then lo and behold, 6 months later, Matt, the miracle worker, the extruder drops on our doorstep in Santa Cruz, and we put it and then we stand there for about 3 days. What the hell are we going to do with this extruder? Having never run an extruder ourselves, there's like 5 of us, and we're staring at this thing being like, what do we do next? So I guess we kind of turned this thing on and started going. And that first 6 to 9 months was the absolute wild, wild west. I'm surprised we didn't blow ourselves up at the end of the day, in all honesty. We had no right to be running that
It's just
machine.
because you were following all those as standards.
Yeah, all the OSHA things, of course, naturally. But honestly, that was such a monumental step for us to take that I look back, had we hedged our bet, been a little less risky, and again, kind of identified that moment, like, there's no chance we'd be where we are. We would have been out of business. We would have not been able to raise capital, and I don't think we would have built this platform, because what that allowed us to do is just have such a quick iterative process of learning in a way that we knew was the exact translatory technology we would need to take to market. Like I said, there was no gap. And I guess, of course, it was incredibly hard working on screw designs, die designs, length over D of extruder, all these things, how you stage the different heating profiles, the fluid dynamics, the it's crazy. And I'm probably touching on 5% of the actual complexity of what it takes for these guys, and how far we've taken it both from that early stage, but now, we're able to fully run pelletization, granulation on standard plastic polyethylene style, machines. And we're foaming on a large extrusion system that, is on our partner site over on the East Coast. And I think I look back at that and what we built, it's understanding not just the steps of the technical, but how they just have to map to make this move at a pace that bridges, like I said, it's all about connecting this ecosystem in a way that's going to be effective. And the foaming, ironically, it sounds weird, has been strangely one of the easiest parts.
Incredible.
Yeah, well, I mean, you just start thinking about it, and you're just like, the realization of this being possible has been eye opening when we've taken it to different industry players, and I won't name names, but some of the biggest foamers in the country, we've taken our foam to, we've had very long conversations with, and we can tell when they pick it up and they see it, there is palpable surprise on what's happening. And and that's what we want. We want this to shift. We want to be a catalyst. We're not coming in here and saying this all needs to be torn down. We're saying this can be shifted, this can be changed, this can be adapted. And we're not saying that this entire infrastructure is now completely defunct and useless. Like, it's the complete opposite. And we're excited for that. And so it's time.
That's an incredible story, John. Thank you so much for sharing
No,
that
of
that
course.
bit of all the fun that you had. And interestingly, this is again a surprising kind of synchronicity from Australia to Thailand. My wife and I got stuck in Thailand because we were in the north of
Really?
Thailand when the COVID hit, and
No
I
way.
was just dilly-dallying on my US kind of visa status, and she had a something called overseas citizen of India status. She could enter India and I could enter US. So we had to split up for 8 months. I went to India, she went to US, thinking, a month, 2 months, we'd meet somewhere and we'd carry on. We were on a sabbatical year, and it was north of Thailand that got us. So, I'm glad Matt got out in time because he may have
That
split
is
up with
absolutely
whoever was
insane.
this. Yeah,
That is
yeah, it's crazy.
insane story.
Yeah, that's fun. Well, good experience. I want to move to products, but just as I move to product, and it's to stay with products. This is also product, but did you actually sell any surfboards?
Not fully. No, we made one that was about 3 feet long back in the day. Good Lord, his properties were horrendous. We're being very generous calling it a surfboard. I think, what we saw is, like I said, the way we were trying to do it that made no sense. But ironically, I mentioned a second ago, we're getting to a point where our extrusion platform is starting to breach the viability of making a surfboard. And so some early
So
conversations I
it might
had,
still happen.
well, it's very funny. And, I love the word circular, obviously, but one of, again, I probably can't name the names, but one of my early conversations very early on when I was trying to do surfboards, I reached out to everybody I could, everybody under the planet, every surfboard shaper in Santa Cruz, every big name surf brand, just trying to learn as much as I could about the industry, the fit and how it might work. But I remember getting on the phone with, at the time, and still probably one of the largest surfboard manufacturers in the world, the CEO. I just sent a blank LinkedIn message to and said, "Hey, I'm doing this project looking at surfboards, would love to kind of see your guys' interest and thoughts on what I'm doing." And he just literally, I want to say it was almost an hour. He sent me a message back on LinkedIn and said, call me, here's my number. And literally I called him, I chatted with him for an hour. And this was literally 8 years ago at this point. I think I was still at University of Washington. And I remember that conversation so palpably. And now, 7 years later, we are working with that company. And so
That's incredible.
there's
Good on
still a lot
him
of
to
development
actually,
to go,
yeah,
but it's
yeah.
weird when you look at just, it's
Yeah,
weird.
synchronicity,
Yeah.
synchronicity. One of my coaches says there is no such thing as coincidence.
I
It happens for a
completely,
reason at a at a certain point of time.
we have this weird thing. And I don't believe, I'm not a big believer in the idea of fate, but I do believe in karma. And we have this joke in this company that there's these unexplainable karmic events that have happened in ways that, like, you always look for them. That's the human spirit. You always want to find meaning, but it's sometimes you're just like, I'm not even looking for them. This is really hard to explain how this happened. So
It's
it's
karma
fun.
is circular economy again.
There we go. There we go.
Do unto others as you want done, or whatever the quote
No,
says,
I love that.
something like that. Okay, let's move to the products that you have. So of course you've created some incredible products, and the cold chain,
Yeah.
e-commerce, block and brace. All these are very very interesting products, and they kind of tweaks of the same thing. It seems softer, harder,
Yep.
kind of thing. So how did you guys decide that this is the kind of protective gear? Is the kind of gear? It's not the right
Yeah.
word,
I
but
know what you mean.
protective stuff is what you want to get into. Did the product kind of guide you there, or was this like, okay, we want to make some kind of foam and then create the product? And then how did you decide on these three, or how did the evolution happen towards these three domains?
That's a very good question. That's a very, very good question. I think I touched on it when we came into the NSF I-Core program, when I made that a glorious trip to Australia. I think what we realized was, we had a material that had high strength. We had a material that had, the time it was kind of high density. It's gotten much lower, but low enough density. We were like, we should look at this industry around foam. And I think at the time, and they're still doing pretty dang good work, is, in the cold chain was TemperPack. I think Ecovative was doing some work, and they're doing some interesting stuff in bacon now. But I mean, Ecovative was kind of another name then. Um, and we kind of looked at that. We're like, okay, well, cold chain seems a little bit not crowded, but not where we could bring the most value at the point of entry. And we looked at the strength and the protection nature of our foam, and we said, well, why not block and brace? And so again, you go into that, and goodness, there is so many things that need block and brace. I mean, we did everywhere from trying to initially block and brace a automotive motor at like 500 pounds or whatever, all the way down to a $500 bottle of face cream lotion that's this big, that's going into, a little package for a cosmetic company, and one's using foam, one's using like a plastic molded base. We're like, hey, if you can make that in foam, we'll use that instead. And we're like, we had no idea where this was going to fit initially. We were trying to trial everything under the sun, which is always the cardinal mistake everybody makes at the beginning is, I'm just going to do everything. This will work for everything. And the first year, I would say almost a year and a half, probably, when we were making this transition, we were just accepting everything under the sun. We'll trial that. We'll prototype that. We'll do this. And looking back, it was probably good because we learned so much, not just around where our performance of our material could add the most value, but also the industries that wanted to actually move and make these implementations a reality. Because you have some of them that I hate to say it are kind of blowing smoke and they know they don't really have to do anything. And then you have certain ones who are like, yeah, this is coming down my throat and we need to fix this in like the next 5 years. And helping us kind of identify that really painted the picture of, like you said, was it the material with the product? I really think it was almost looking more at like, industry verticals that we could tap into, then really shift them on a more global scale. We didn't want to come in and be a singular application material product, like, I don't want to say just making coolers. I mean, we're making a cooler right now, so that's a weird thing to say, but like just making coolers. And so it's like, how do we build a platform? And that's really where the manufacturing for us comes in, where we're making the fundamental material that can go into and be used in a very wide range of packaging applications. And doing that is through extrusion. It allows you to do sheets, it allows you to do rolls, it allows you to do different profiles. And when you look at the packaging space, when you look at these enormous entities, working with customers like Whirlpool and the Block and Brace, Whirlpool ain't out there packaging their products. Whirlpool isn't out there sourcing all of the foam and cardboard and shrink wrap and printing. They go to converters. They go to packaging solution providers. And how do these guys get all this material? Naturally, they're getting it on bulk. And if you look at foam, how are they getting foam on bulk? Sheets, rolls, or giant blocks of polyurethane. And really, when we looked at that, we were saying, okay, well, we know where we're kind of seeing where we're going to add the most value. And initially it was in block and brace. And naturally, I think there's still just an enormous we can also do in cold chain, which I'll touch on. But regardless of which one it went into, we realized that there's going to be a plateau if we don't get to the more fundamental level of how this gets into the ecosystem and supply chain, and that's working in a way that this works with these converters and these larger packaging providers. And so by being able to make these sheets and going to them, they can do all the die cutting, they can do all the lamination, they can do all the post-processing to make the box for Whirlpool, to make the box for the lotion, maybe not the motor. That might be a unique case, but we can talk about that one separately. But we realized that by going that way, we were able to really provide a systematic change that wasn't a singular solution. And so right now, when we look at it, where we really want to focus, I would say it's on cold chain and block and brace, because I think when you look at the logistical impact, a lot of times the carbon that goes into the products that go into these packaging is enormous. And so it's like, how do we, again, understand the connectivity, not just in the packaging, but I think one of the things that really is core, again, kind of coming out of the pandemic, is the product and packaging are very much not seen as separate anymore. I think so many consumers, so many people, a lot of people in regulation, legislation, these are starting to become holistic packages or solutions or material sets. It's not like, oh, here's my product, I don't care what this came in. There's a lot of interest, there's a lot of necessity on how that experience and how that holistic package is now being viewed as opposed to was before. And it's going to be something we want to stay ahead of and understand where we can always kind of adapt, like I said, and tune our materials, because right now we see protection and insulation. We can get the same insulation as EPS. We can get the same protection as EPS. We can produce them in the same way. But then it's also looking at ahead if there's other ways in which, we want to create something that has incredible rebound. We're exploring that right now, things that have incredible resilience. That's something that's not very common in biomaterials. You look at, again, I love these materials, but you look at a pure starch peanut, you look at a mushroom foam, you squish them, they're kind of done. They're not bouncing back too much. And it's like, I think that's a challenge for biomaterials. So it's like, how do we always kind of innovate, knowing that our core value we want to bring is material science and technology. And it's more about activating this industry as a whole. And I think that's what we're doing right now.
Do you know a wonderful, wonderful gentleman called Oded Shozeoff?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, I have to get you in touch with him. So he did something incredible. He works out of the Hebrew University in Israel, and he grew collagen,
Huh.
and it's incredible. And he's got a great TED talk. Watch that, and then I'll connect you guys. He's actually been on the show as well, and you can listen to that. He describes his idea, but it's incredible because when you talk about elasticity, that's actually what he created. And
Wow.
how do you create collagen? So he started injecting this into, it's like, again, similar to you, it's the intersection of biology and technology. He injected it into tobacco plants and started growing collagen. It was incredible. And I've been
What?
to his lab. Yeah, it's incredible. You should listen to his TED Talk. It's an incredible TED Talk. It's just like, it blows your
That's
mind. And as a
awesome.
materials guy, you would love it. And then, we can connect with him. And I'm sure your elasticity issue could be resolved from that as well. It could be one of the
No,
methodologies
I
that would
love it. I
excite you.
absolutely love that.
Yeah. Okay, but going to the raw material again, how difficult or easy is it to source chitin? And is it just that people are throwing it away and you can just take it for free, or is it more complex than that? And how do you build supply chains? What does it come as? Do you actually buy the shells and
It
reform that,
depends.
or are you buying the fiber? Yeah.
You can get chitin as a pure shell. Most times it's going to come as a fiber or a powder or fiber. It's ground up. I think where we're trying to understand where it goes is, again, there's certain industries that are developing and really capturing the entire profile around the shell waste. And I touched on them, Tidal Vision as an example. And so it's like a lot of these guys are developing processes that are very robust and they see to a lot of different industries. And what I like about that is they're starting to get a much more global presence around what the value is behind the supply chain that was previously completely ignored. Like I said, they're taking the minerals out, they're doing soil amendments, they're taking the proteins, they're taking the chitin, they're doing stuffs with, water treatment and purification, they're doing fiber. And we want to find partners that have that similar mentality for that supply expansion because chitin, it is everywhere. There ain't no problem getting it, but it's quality, it's how is it sourced, and then it's obviously the overall impact. And so we really, as we grow our supply chain, and not just chitin, obviously, but we look at the other materials that we source, as we grow, how do we build that partnership network to support not only the quality, but the consistency, both in, the impact on sourcing and how we can keep, naturally, like I said, cost and performance in line. And that's always been one of the biggest challenges, I think, like I mentioned with biomaterials, is as we start scaling, as we start going, how do we make sure that that stays at pace with the demand that, well, we definitely see, but the production we hope to achieve? And we've always kind of thought, did we want to get involved in like vertically integrating the supply into our business? And it just isn't something that we add enough value that I think benefits us enough when we look at the sheer amount of effort, but also the sheer amount of readily available supply out there. And so it's kind of a balance, I guess, is what I would say. Some is easier to get, some is much harder to get. And I think the levers of challenge and sourcing is going to direct a lot of those different market verticals that we can address. Like I said, some of the things like need to be really low cost right now. But as we start getting market adoption and people start understanding what this material is and we start getting good partners on site, that supply thing is naturally going to go with us. And if it does, we might also be able to really support other market verticals, which will support the growth of that supply. It's all connected. And it's unfortunate that I don't want to say it's not easier because that's not necessarily the term I'm looking for. I think it's just unfortunate. There's not better infrastructure to support it. And a lot of it is in material recovery. A lot of it is understanding, not just in recycling or composting, but again, just understanding industrial processing, recovery, and diversion. Not letting things go to landfill that are just completely, there's no reason they should be going there. So I think for us, the more we can do that and the more we can kind of enhance that as we build our supply chain globally is critical because that's a huge component. So, I mean, we're making materials. We're not making a software. Like we have to be cognizant of the raw materials we take from this planet and the impact it has. And that's something that I love about, again, chitin being one of the examples, is a lot of the materials we take come from areas that have the most adverse impact from the and life of the materials we make from those raw sources. A lot of packaging ends up in areas where we're taking a lot of sources that are, maybe not managed as well as they could be. And I think for us, it's that connectivity and circularity is critical from source to manufacturing to end of life.
Yeah, and it's interesting for me to hear, like, of course, and it's pretty. It should have been pretty clear, but it was interesting to hear that there's different kinds. It's not like there's a chitin and that's it.
No,
There's
it's
all
yeah.
different kinds, and you have to decide on what you use. I guess different shells have different properties. But are you able to source most of it nearby, locally, or you have to go all the way to Asia or something to get the chitin fibers?
Again, that's one of the economic challenges right now. We always want to develop regional supply partners, no matter what it is. And so one of the challenges with chitin specifically is not a ton of it in North America. There's enough to definitely support all the manufacturing we need to do. But if we start looking at making those bigger jumps to, internationally or licensing or all these things, Asia's got a lot. Europe, yeah, probably, so it's like, it's a challenge where that's why we don't want to be a single source material. And that's why I think being a single source product is a losing game, especially when you're trying to battle these things that, good Lord, they've had an 80-year head start. I mean, come on. So it's like, we got to be agile and figure out how we break through this. And that's where it can definitely be challenging. And it's just about being strategic and how that growth can be realistic, but also move quickly because it has to.
And when you look at production, is it do you do a lot of how do you do it? Is it all in-house or do you outsource the production? I guess there must be some compounding where, like
Yep.
you're saying, different materials,
Yep.
and I guess that you have to keep closer to you. And so how is
For
that whole
sure.
thing structured?
Yeah, no, you're pretty spot on. I mean, like, obviously we have a facility in Santa Cruz. We have like a 15,000 square foot facility here. It's basically our R&D facility. We do a lot of just early formula development, new exploration, and kind of can do everything here from, small scale compounding to foaming to just kind of understand that first jump to the kind of commercial viability, if you will, where it's worth exploring. After that, we have some partners right now, both in Chicago, or the Chicago area, I should say, and in North Carolina. And so we compound right now in the Chicago area. And so it's on a standard, like I said, toll compounding relationship. It's standard for industry, something that's done everywhere. We're not trying to do anything crazy there. Obviously, we control the material and how it's mixed and delivered, and there's definitely, levels of IP control there. But I mean, it's the process to granulate is nothing outrageously novel. When we look at how we get to the foaming, that's really where that breakthrough is so critical. Because definitely granulation is important, like the process control, like making sure you get those parameters right, get good homogenization of the different material inputs to make sure they co-polymerize. Very critical, of course. But it's a little easier for sure to turn something into a pellet than to make a foam. And people maybe not understand why, but it's one of those ideas of you have to time something so incredibly perfect. You have to get material expansion, and you could have in a liquid form, essentially, more or less. It's kind of on this weird verge between, solid and liquid as it's coming out of the extruder, but it has to literally expand and set in a very simultaneous instant. Otherwise, you get decompression and you lose all your air. Or if you set too quickly, you don't expand. So you just have a rock. So there's this very fine balance when you look at the chemical material and fluid dynamics of materials of how you need to foam. And so much as that this harmonious relationship between the materials set, the pellet, the granule, whatever you want to call it, and then how that's fed into the extruder. And again, standard extrusion lines, but where the magic is in the screws, the screw design, how you push the material, how you get the right material flow, how you get the right pressure buildup, how you get the right temperature, and then pairing that with what's called the die. And it's basically, you can make it a sheet, you can make it a circle, you can make it a profile, whatever I wouldn't say whatever, but a wide range of things. And the whole magic there is that pairing has to be, I don't want to say perfect, but it's got to be dang near perfect. And you get this popcorn effect. You get this magic moment of something that's coming out of a hole that's, probably that size, let's say less than my finger, and expanding, to just an enormous amount. And these are on our R&D lines. And so it's just like you start seeing this, you just start seeing this massive expansion, and it's incredibly exciting. I remember the first couple of times we actually saw it flow at a rate that is, these are matching the throughputs of standard foaming. We're not talking like slow foaming. This is coming out at 3, 4, 5 feet a second. It's shooting out of these machines. And we started really understanding that connection of, okay, we have this platform, but now if we're going to take this out, we have to create this technology stack that can go to many different setups. Because I don't want to say no extruder is the same, but all of them are just a little kind of different. You're going to have like a longer barrel, you're going to have a different size motor, you're going to have whatever. And so again, there's going to be little tweaks, but the whole idea is how do we drop in and work with these existing assets where they don't have to say, oh, this entire machine is totally useless now, and we have to go buy a new $10 million line. That dog's never going to hunt. And so when we started realizing that's the real breakthrough is once we validated that stack, it was really, okay, now how do we get this to the stage where we find good partners? And then the goal is naturally getting this to licensing. How do we get this to a point where when we have interest, we have a ton of interest. We are actually talking to a number of producers and different converters and stakeholders in Europe and Japan and Latin America. And, when we understand that, it's like, there's two routes to do this. We either bring all the technology over there, we bring all the machinery, do all that work. And yeah, that's one way to do it. It's going to cost $10 million. It's going to take 2 years, and you have one factory. And it's like, well, this is not going to happen fast enough. And that's where we understand if we get this right, which is what we're doing right now on the East Coast with our first partners in their facilities on these standard lines, and replicating that and getting good market traction with that is what we're seeing right now with the demand and matching that production that we see. It's not completely de-risked, but this really starts flipping the switch for the viability of this being at scale very, very, very fruitful for those who want to partner and make this happen. So
Yeah, no, that's great because and that's actually a lot of inspiration for me. We tend to go more the manufacturing route. We must do it all ourselves, and that is, yeah, you're right. You can only scale that fast in that case. So you're going to be.
You guys have been around for a little bit longer, so I think you guys have you've gotten over that hurdle, and I think it's a different model for different setups. I think one of the things that's been challenging, and I think I was somehow going to mention this. It's interesting when you look at the support and infrastructure. And I think one of the things, unfortunately, I wouldn't say it's been done by any purpose or anything. Foam has never really been the forefront of things that were being addressed, and it's like, and I think the one thing that's a great example of innovation, but also an example of not the wrong way, but where it needs to be done more fundamentally is we see tons in block and brace where packaging providers have tried to take corrugate or these other things and fold them and cut them and create these incredibly complex three-dimensional shapes that they're trying to put in and act as a replacement for foam or these other things to package something, and it doesn't perform normally. The cost is like outrageously through the roof. And it's because it's the only thing that they have. You have all of these brands. They want to switch. Like, I want to stop using this foam, but like, there's no alternative out there right now. And so they're like, what's literally the only thing that's going to be close to working? Of course, we'll try to use this corrugate. But then you're just already going down the path of cost going through the roof, labor going through the roof, logistics going through the roof. And it's like, why don't we just kind of look at changing the foam? It just seems like you're already going down the really hard path, and it's like there's other solutions here. And I think that reality is starting to break through with our technology, and it's fun to hear the people that know the name Cruise Foam. It's been really exciting to hear over the last 2 years. And we're working in France with a couple, we're part of the LVMH program over there, and so it's been really incredible to see kind of this palpable switch, I think, in excitement around this switch being really capable. It's
And
fun.
when you're kind of rated as Time's best innovations to
That doesn't
2023,
hurt.
it
That
kind of you
doesn't
get
hurt.
known a little bit. So just quickly on the product side, and you were mentioning this on when you were talking about the corrugated stuff, but there's also the pulp molding that is
Yeah.
happening, and that's
Yep.
in the block and brace.
Yep.
And you mentioned a couple of others as you went along. You mentioned TemperPack, which is cellulose-based kind of
Yep.
foaming. You mentioned Ecovative, which is mycelium based,
Yep.
and they were more protective. So when you compare all these technologies, and of course, let's take polystyrene in as well. When you compare all of this on function or performance as well as cost, how do you manage to do that? Because I'm sure these are things that you deal with every
Oh,
day.
yes.
And where do you rate yourself, and how do you manage to kind of say that we're doing better than these technologies, and that's why we have to keep investing in this area? How does that work?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think when we look at it, it depends very much on clearly where we're talking in the market or what application. If we're talking cold chain packaging, block and brace specifically, I think where we've really wanted to differentiate ourselves is clearly matching the performance, but doing it in a way where you're not sacrificing cost naturally, but also it allowing it to be ubiquitously adopted on a global scale. And when I look at, probably the most obvious one, TemperPack, they've done an absolutely incredible job in cold chain. I think when I look at what they've struggled with, it's scaling the production. They just can't make enough of it quick enough, which is a great problem to have, but not when you're trying to really shift these industries. And then the other side of that is, I would argue the reason that's the case is the manufacturing process that they've developed is very, very unique, and it's very proprietary to them. And so it's very, very hard to translate that out of house where anybody's going to want to tear down all the equipment they just put in over the last 80 years and scale that up. And so from that point of view, I would say there's a huge differentiator between us. And then I would also say when we look at our market specifically around cold chain, a lot of not just TemperPack, there's a ton of them out of there, but most common ones you'll see is the C clamp. It's kind of like you have the one, and the little flap is at the top, and that's how you get your food out. Well, there's a reason they package mostly food. You put anything heavy in there, you put anything super fragile in there, you put anything in there that's going to have a lot of shift or kind of dynamic weight to it, those things move. You get shifting. You get really you get sensitive air leakage if it's for something that is not a banana, let's call it. And so one of the areas we're seeing a lot of interest in our cold chain is in high sensitive markets. You can imagine things like pharma and things like very, very high end meats and these other things that are going over very long logistical supply chains, international, shipping from places like Chile. And why that's important is because these guys, I mean, we obviously can't do it quite yet. The point is the platform is there where we could and will be planning to produce our foam and our packaging in that area. It would not be, you got to buy it from Santa Cruz, ship it down to Chile and manufacture it up. Yes, maybe it's not in Chile, maybe it's in Argentina, but it's in the regional local area.
Shipping a lot of air.
And so that's where it's like, that's also the breaking point. And I think, again, I absolutely love the material. It's actually one of my biggest inspirations, Ecovative. The best thing I can say about them, great material. When you look at packaging, the need to grow something for 7 days is going to make it an extremely low volume, high entry adoption type of situation. That's the adoption there is just going to naturally be low. And so again, it's offering a unique solution to something that needs a systematic, not turnkey, but something that can really activate that production monster that is packaging. And I think that's where we kind of really differentiate is on the manufacturing. And then, I touched on it before. I think it's ultimately performance. We rival EPS. We've made some of our materials, that have higher R value and installation values than EPS. The design, why we won the Cruise School, Time Magazine, why we won the Pinto Award design. We have some other fun stuff coming out that I can't talk about, but there's a reason, because we've done so much work, we've done so much analysis, especially working with, one of our partners in Atlantic Packaging, looking at the cold chain, looking at how do we design this, how do we take our material and get the best out of it, but then also understand the translatory nature that needs to have to going and scaling with other partners that we're going to need. We're going to need to work with other converters. We're going to need to work with other producers. And so understanding what we develop and put to market here, it's going to have to be able to scale effectively within that system. And ultimately, I think that's where cost-wise, we're pretty dang close to EPS. I maybe don't want to say exactly where it is. We're almost. I would say in some instances, depending what you're packaging. If we're talking about a half pound, most terrible EPS on the planet, probably not. If you're talking a 1.5,
relatively
2 pound,
dense.
we're in that ballpark right now, and I think that's really where parity for us this year is on the books without a doubt. And so that's the breakthrough.
Incredible. Yeah, and I totally agree with you on, you can't disrupt everything. So, you might as well, and you're totally right. People have invested billions of dollars in that supply chain, and they're not going to just throw it away and say that, we're going to just set up another factory. It's like it's just so capital intensive. So
time. It takes so much time.
Time again, right?
Yeah.
And you took time to get that one extruder from Thailand.
Woo,
and imagine
yes.
that. So I think it's really smart to stay with the same supply chain and tweak. And I'm sure you talked about it, and I'm sure it's way more complex than even what you're making it out to be, because I've worked with melt flow index and getting that right, and and people don't want to even shift because they're used to a certain flow rate, they're used to a certain expansion. And they don't want to tweak their machines, their temperatures or whatever profiles. And I'm sure that's not an easy thing to kind of get to do. And there's a complexities of making something new. So kudos to you guys to be able to do
appreciate that. That is the truth, without a doubt. It is not something that you go in and just say, everybody's jumping on board and saying, let's go do this. You're like, no, you got to do the hard work. And it's
or they're going to charge you machine time.
They're happy to charge you machine time, but when you're in a startup, you got to be pretty maniacal and strategic around that trial time. But that's why getting the machine in house and having those iterations. I hate to say it, there's an incredible amount of biomaterial companies out there. I fear for a lot that don't recognize that necessity, and take that risk. Because I think it was absolutely game changing for us.
Everything, like even in our company, what we try and create, we say don't try to cannibalize the supply chain, because that's not going to get you anywhere. Because ultimately, like you're noticing that the buyers, the ultimate customers, the companies, they need a certain quantity of supply, and they rely on their current suppliers. If you're going to cannibalize the suppliers, you're not going to. And
the brands aren't going to like it either. No chance.
It's both ways. So that's great. Okay, jumping quickly to the end of use. And I'm really impressed that you say that it's not just compostable, it's also recyclable, which is incredible. And, I used to use a Lomi. I shifted to a Renical, but I love the Lomi score of 100. And that's very interesting for me to read on your website. So talk to us more about how you've engineered the end of use and, how is it recyclable as well as compostable. And clearly your heart is in that place where you are making sure that it's kind of having a real end of use. So love to hear that story.
No, 100%. And that's something we wanted to make sure we identified from the beginning. Where are these materials we're taking? Let's make sure they're waste in every instance that we possibly can make sure that we're getting these from waste. And let's make sure these are materials that, are compostable, recyclable. They have ways in which they can break down, be recovered. And hopefully, most times it can be done just in a natural environment, because, I hate to say it, a lot of things don't get recovered. And so what we really wanted to understand was, looking at the material inputs, there's a process of the product design that's going to have such a heavy impact at the very beginning on how that fits into recovery. And so for us, we always wanted to make sure that the standalone foam by itself could be, at bare minimum, industrial compostable. Right now, we can do backyard compost, we're doing the TUV and all the good certifications. And then ultimately, if this ends up in, heaven forbid, we're definitely not advocating this, but it ends up in marine, it ends up in ecosystems. Let's make sure this breaks down in a reasonable amount of time, 3 months. Let's make sure this doesn't leave any enormous amount of residual microplastics. Right now, we don't leave any, zero. And the best gold standard is, let's make this regenerative. Let's make this in a way where it's adding and capturing, like right now, chitin, one of the best things about chitin is it fixates nitrogen in soil. It creates a healthy soil environment to promote growth. It's one of the things that's in our white papers. We've seen that, some of our formulations, some of our products, we have obviously a lot, but, we've been able to develop materials that act as grow media for things like vertical farming. And so we're not going down that path, but the point is it's really understanding like where that connectivity is so critical from not just the design, but the end of life. And so that's the material basis, which is the easy part. That's the easy part, which is strange to say, but that is the easy part. You get into trying to understand, okay, how do I make a product recyclable? How do I make a product, quote unquote, compostable? How do I make something reusable? And I hate to say it, but it is incredibly confusing. It is not well defined, and there is no clear path. And what we really wanted to do was make sure we could make products that could be tunable in that end of life, depending on the brand it would go into, the supply chain it was going into, and ultimately, as much as we could, how it could be recovered given those different factors of that product's lifespan. And so when we look at the cold chain, a lot of that, especially with the cruise cool right now, is B2C. We're doing stuff that's going direct to consumer. What's most readily available with direct to consumer? Natural recycling. I think composting is going down that route. But when we combine our foam, the cruise cool specifically with the corrugate, it can go through the same slurry process. It breaks down. You get the fiber. Naturally, some of that biofoam is lost into the slurry, which is, I think, one thing that could be improved. I think there is a lot of ways in which, when we look at how composting, in a lot of ways, could be better than recycling. And it's not always the best case, but I think there's a lot of things that have been not neglected, but I would almost just say misunderstood. And how compostable materials have so much lost value, when I said if we can design the product right, and you're actually getting really amazing composting, feedstock material, but then also looking at all the other components around what that is. And, a lot of people are kind of like, oh, organics, and, they go to landfill and they emit methane, they emit all these gases, which that sucks for sure. But why are we not trying to capture these gases? It's not a very difficult, understood process of how these can be captured, and it's done at scale in many places, and turn these things into things like electricity, turn these things like into fuel. And actually, my favorite one is in SLO. We visited San Luis Obispo, for those who don't know, but it's in California. They have what's called an anaerobic digestion, and we went to this facility. It's very impressive. It's a continuous composting machine. It's massive. It's absolutely massive. And they get regenerative soil compost, from the input. And then part of it is it captures the offtake of the methane gas, and it goes into, basically, I don't know the exact words, but basically it turns it into a biofuel. And it turns that biofuel that then, guess what? It operates the waste recovery vehicles that then go drive around and pick up all the other compostable material. And you're like, oh my goodness, this is a strangely almost closed loop system that is not that incredibly hard to imagine or understand how this could work at scale and be valuable. And that's where we look at the infrastructure component. And I think there's a lot of movement. And that's why I'm very excited about the compostable nature of where materials can go. But for us, from a product point of view, we just understand it's so dynamic right now. There's so much shifting on how people are trying to recover materials at a higher rate, how they're trying to get more valuable, inputs out of what they, recover. And we want to make sure we're part of that conversation from the onset with the products and how we design them, and make sure that they can be adaptable with where that landscape goes. Because I hate to say it, but it is very true how murky it is a little bit, and how that's going to pan out over the next decade or so, when we look at the global supply chain.
Yeah, I could agree more, because there's this whole trend, and I'm sure you're noticing this trend of the lower hanging fruit of recycling.
Yeah.
But lower hanging, I don't know if it's fruit. Yeah, that's the wrong term. But anyways, lower hanging possibility
Yes.
recycling. But again, like you're saying, and you probably understand it really well, there is no such thing as recycling. Ultimately,
Yeah.
it's going to downcycle.
Yep.
And I keep questioning, it has to get out at some point.
Yep.
What is that point? So you have to also plan for that. You can't just, it's not perpetually not
100%.
downcyclable. So that's something that is, and it's interesting for me that people are not understanding that, or if they're understanding, they're ignoring that. So well, I hope that good sense prevails and it can continue. So when you say recyclable, is it in the paper stream that you're
Yeah.
talking about? Because
Yeah.
there's so
It's like
much
in the
paper.
it's like in the
That's
corrugate.
incredible. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's super because paper will be recovered almost 80%.
100%.
So better
100%.
than 8% in polymers.
I'm
So
all
that's
for
great
that.
that you get to
Yeah.
that. Yeah. At least it's going to high chance that it's going to
Yeah.
be.
And that's where we want to be able to provide that, because it's one of the better recovery facilities we have right now, without a doubt, when we look at it. And it's just like, how do we replicate it, and how do we just understand that where the value, again, it's so weird. We talk about value being lost on the front end around the raw material waste, and now it's like we're losing the waste again by not like understanding how to get more out of it. And it's a double-edged sword.
The other thing which I really wanted to interject there is that you probably realize it. You've actually caught on to is on both sides. Don't disrupt the supply chain. So don't disrupt the supply chain production. Don't disrupt the supply chain and recovery, because then paper is already being recovered, and if they can just put it into that pulper and recycle it, that's wonderful, because they are going to do that if that's
100%.
possible. There's a high value to that. And just so that we are even at our manufacturing, we even use our wastewater to generate methane, which is incredible,
That's
right? Like it's
amazing.
just high
That's absolutely
chemical
amazing.
oxygen, yeah, chemical load, and you just kind of, yeah, you just use it. You create these digesters and use the wastewater, which is incredible to see.
I mean, that's
Yeah.
like it's all connected. It's all connected, and it's just, again, it seems complicated, but it's like with a little energy, no pun, I guess, intended. It seems
Yeah.
like this is something we could do. You know?
Yeah, it just needs a little system design, but you're right. All it actually needs for us as consumers is dry waste, wet waste. If you
Yep.
just divide that two things, the wet waste, you're totally right. You can, and I'm glad they're doing it in California, where you can actually generate
Yep.
gas and create compost. So it's both values. So I'm going to take a quick kind of left turn and take it towards closure as well. I realize
No,
we've
you're
just
good.
been chatting for over an hour, 40 minutes. So how do you get these, little known people like Leonardo DiCaprio and Ashton Kutcher to kind of buy into your ideas and, invest in the company? It's really wonderful to see that. And I see that they are so aligned to these ideas, but to actually be able to put the money where what they're talking about and connecting with them. How did you manage to do that? How did you kind of
Oh,
connect with
yes.
those guys and get them?
Very, very surreal, without a doubt. When I look back in like Santa Barbara, or even in the basement lab in Santa Cruz, thinking that would be an occurrence is absolutely ridiculous. And it kind of touches on what I think I said before. It's about the support. It's about the people you bring around you. It's about your network. And I'm very lucky, even here in Santa Cruz. It's a small town, you could say, but I've been able to meet some incredible people here. One of the first was Toby Corey, coming out of, he's a former Tesla Solar Steady, working inside Elon. But where it really brought understanding to me was, if I'm going to do this company correctly, it's not just about the technology; it's about that team dynamic. And for an early stage company, you don't realize it until you're in it, but the team is so incredibly important around the drive, the passion, and the culture to make sure that alignment is there. And that's not just the team of the people running the extruder. I'm talking about your advisors. I'm talking about your friggin' lawyers. I'm talking about most definitely your investors. And very early on, there was this moment where it was about 2 or 3 years into the company, and I was trying to raise the first capital. I was trying to go out and raise like $2 million, and my God, I fell flat on my face. But I raised about 200,000, and I was lucky enough to get into this program called the Sustainable Ocean Alliance. It's backed by Mark Benioff, and it was the second cohort. And part of the second cohort was going out on a National Geographic boat through Southeast Alaska and going and basically spending a week out there where you have no reception. I mean, there's barely internet. And it was me and I think 19 other founders and then 20 other curated people that were on the boat, be it filmmakers, be it investors, be it whoever. And it was just going through and exploring the different, basically, climate impacts happening in real time going through Alaska. And I remember we went to one of the fjords, and I don't remember the name off the top of my head, but it was, I mean, it was here the length of a football field, maybe a little bit longer for safety, but that's about what it felt like, where you just see, the fjord and the ice shelf just calving, just massive chunks in real time. Like we were probably there for 4 hours. I think we saw at least a handful of big chunks just falling off. And it's just, and you're like, oh, I mean, it was, that was a huge impactful moment. But on the boat, I was able to meet this gentleman. His name's Tom Chi. He runs a fund called At One Ventures. And he, without a doubt, I would say, is one of the largest inflection points of this company. He hadn't even started the fund at the time. He was coming out of Google X. He was one of the original hardware founders. He wrote like a ton of their first patents. And he was kind of like, I'm going to go do something new. He had no idea. He's one of the most unique geniuses I've ever met. If you haven't had a chance to chat with him, he will blow your mind on how his mind works. And I met him, and he was our first investor. But more than that, I remember this moment I had with him when we were very early on, and he drove down 4 hours and met with me. And essentially, we saw that he was just this perfect fit for us. And what happened is all of a sudden, we got tapped into this ocean network of investors that we had no idea even existed. And this, no idea. And it took me 3 years to find them. I was trying to go raise money from SaaS VCs, and these people were like, I don't want to say laughing me out the door, but more or less laughing me out the door. And when I got into this network, all of a sudden we started to realize there were these just culturally and just passionately aligned investor base that we didn't realize existed. And one other one was called Regeneration VC. And if you look at their background, it's hilarious because the one founder, he actually invested us personally with a personal check in one of the angel rounds. And then it was about a year later, he came back. I think he had started a fund, and he started a fund. And what was ironic, because I didn't know it at the time, but about a year after he invested, he gave me a call, and he was like, yeah, well, we were talking to, Leo's group. And I was like, Leo's group, who? And he was like, he's on our advisory board. I'm like, who's on your advisory board? He's like Leonardo DiCaprio. I was like, what? And he was like, yeah, we did like our investor update or whatever. And he was like, Cruisefoam's one of the companies that he picked out. He's like, he wants to learn more about what you guys are doing. And I was just like, this like basically can't be real. And, there's layers and layers. Didn't even meet him until after the investment. Honestly, you deal with all of his people. But what was incredible was meeting him and just seeing the knowledge he possesses in the climate space blew me
Wow.
away. It blew me away. And it wasn't just about like the climate space. It was actually the inner workings of, I would say, obviously doesn't know everything about packaging, but understanding like materials impact, just the connectivity of it, which I was not expecting. And through the last few years, it's just compounded. And I think it speaks volumes. I think it was Business Insider, Business Journal, said he's the most reputable or most trusted climate, advocate in the world. I mean, there's a reason. He knows what he's talking about. And he's been incredible. And I think having his resource and his backing is obviously just a testament to the importance of this shift that needs to happen. And, the huge issue that we see around the waste that we're just blanketing this earth with. And, Ashton's no different. He's one of the things that's incredible about Ashton is he digs in hard. He wants to know the inner workings in and out. And so they come at it from kind of different flavors. But the business acumen that Ashton has been a huge asset for us. And so you look at the name and obviously it doesn't hurt, but then you look at the value and it's been, I would say, in ways that I didn't actually expect could happen for us when I look back at how this all started.
It's incredible to have people like that around you. It's like, well, that's what they say, we are who we surround ourselves with. And, to be able to, or the universe having that synchronicity to see and to feel
Yep.
that energy and connecting those energies, or as we talked about earlier, the circularity of karma or whatever it is,
It's true. It's true.
yeah,
There's
the
no denying it.
magnetization of this, so the next step could be Hollywood for you. You have a great voice,
Let's
and
hope not.
you're good
Let's hope
looking,
not.
and
Please
the
no.
backup could be could be Hollywood. They might invite you, like, come on, act with us in one of those
Oh
movies.
my goodness. That would be
Okay, I'm going to take
disaster.
it towards this is going to go on forever, so I'm going to take it towards a kind of culmination. So if you look at cruise foam and the incredible work you're doing, and you clearly have this path ahead of you of scaling, and that's something that you brought up a few times. So if you were to look at the next, say, a 5-year horizon, and you were to say, this is my ideal state, this is what I want cruise foam to be like, and it could be numbers, it could be just an imagination. How do you see cruise foam scaling and impacting the world?
That's a good question. Without a doubt, I want to see no more plastic foam used in single-use packaging. That is a no-brainer. There is absolutely no reason this stuff should be used for anything in single use. But I think much greater than that, it's really in 5 years having achieved a catalytic platform that allows the adoption of these biomaterials in a way that can really connect the dots, not just behind the impact, but more around how it really sprawls into the real scalability of manufacturing cost and supply. We want to understand and really bring a technology that makes it intuitive and makes it easy and makes it very clear on how biomaterials can be adopted. Not just, we want to start with packaging, but we want to be a technology company around materials that looks, as I mentioned, where can we start taking this where there's other huge needs? People don't realize it, but foam used in construction is twice the size foam used in packaging, twice. And I would argue it's growing quicker than packaging. When you look at population development, you look at, growth, that is going to be such a huge need when you look at green manufacturing, lead building and all these things. And so I'd love to have cruise foam position where we have our technology stack and international production licensing entities, be it in key, geographical areas, but not just looking at that point singularly at packaging. I'm hoping we've already had an enormous amount of packaging and continue to have an enormous amount of packaging or impact in packaging. But I want to start understanding where else can we look at supply chain? Where else can we look at the materials that we're using and putting on this earth and the resources we take to make them? And I think that's where, for me, that would be the dream state vision, is seeing that kind of evolution really starting to occur beyond, where we initially started.
That's wonderful, and I look forward to seeing that day, especially the first part where you said no styrofoam
Zero.
being used, and zero
Zero.
is the aim, and that would happen through your what you were talking about, creating a platform. Another thing that came to my mind as you were talking about construction, and I don't know if you know of this one, it's actually used a lot in casting. So when you cast metal,
I
there's this
did know
whole
that.
technology of yeah, recon cast, and they kind
Yes.
of they literally form it outside of foam, and they burn the foam. So it's
Yep.
actually fumes that go up. So it's
Yep.
actually even that. I know a friend of mine who does incredible casting. He actually called me over and he said, I hate this. I don't want this to be the
I've seen
case.
it
Can
in
you guys,
bikes.
yeah, can you guys create something? So I should, at some
You
point
should.
when you're ready, yeah, I'm
When
sure
I
you
said
can create it.
when I said we were like burning, or not burning, when we were trying to do everything under the sun, one of the random things that came to us was a bike fabrication company. And they were literally said, we have our frames that are made out of EPS and we wrap the carbon fiber around them and then essentially, cure them, set them, whatever the heck they do. And then like we have a little hole at the bottom. And essentially what we do is we just break apart the EPS and like you said, basically probably melt it out or whatever. And I'm just like, what?
Exactly.
Who would have ever
Yeah.
thought
Yeah.
EPS is used for that? I mean,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
is never
Yeah.
something you would think ever.
It's a huge quantity because
Yeah.
they are actually creating a huge quantity. This was titanium casting, so
Yeah.
pretty carbon titanium kind of similar this, and yeah, it's they basically have to melt it out.
That's
So they were
incredible.
trying to get us to make a pulp molded one. We can't get that kind of finish. So
Yeah.
it was kind of out. So yeah, it's for you. It's for you to solve. Okay, the last one. What does good garbage mean to you, John?
Man, good garbage. I kind of touched on this. I think, and you kind of mentioned it too. It's what is garbage that has, a high value second or even third life, but ultimately ends in circularity. We need to find things that if this is garbage, is there a way where is it garbage? Is this something that can't actually be repurposed or recaptured in a way that isn't just going to be slowly degrading over time and end up where it goes anyways? Or is there a way to actually understand the systems that can be put in place to capture that value? And so when I look at garbage, compostable materials is naturally one of the easier ones to kind of describe, and I kind of did earlier. If you look at that as garbage, that's so short-sighted. Because if you take that, you take it in regenerative soil. You take that, you get, if it's done right, you get useful, biogas. And then at the end of the day, it's done. We're not trying to do this a million times with things that aren't meant to be done. And we need to come to that reality. Like you said, paper, great material to try to go over and over and over again. And that's the infinite, value cycle of a good garbage. If we have material in markets that we're trying to service that isn't a reality, what's the alternative to make a good garbage? And my idea is there's probably still value you can capture. And as we capture that value, let's make it circular. Let's make sure this doesn't stick around. Let's make sure this goes back and comes back to us in another form. Because as I said, and as you said, it ain't going anywhere. There's a mass balance. We don't have to get into energy, but like we aren't making anything and we aren't destroying anything. It is all going to remain here. It's all going to connect here. And so when we look at that and take that kind of crazy idea to heart, let's have that passion and that mindset as we look towards garbage.
And that's so beautifully said. And thankfully, it's not going anywhere because otherwise we wouldn't be here.
We would be in trouble. We would be in trouble.
We would be in trouble if it was going anywhere. So great. This has been such an incredibly inspiring conversation, John.
No, I really enjoyed
it. My jaw is aching from smiling, and I'm totally inspired by what you are doing. So thank you so much for taking the time, for talking to us and to educating. I'm sure many people will benefit from what you're doing and what you've shared. Thank you so much for being here.
No, I really appreciate it. It's been fantastic. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Good Garbage Podcast. Follow us on social media to never miss an episode. Links are in the description below. I'm your host, Ved Krishna. See you next time.